For 10 years, I gave everything I had to that company. Late nights, missed vacations, and every ounce of strategic thinking I possessed. I was the chief operating officer, the engine behind every operational success, the one who turned ideas into revenue and chaos into order. I wasn't just a name on the payroll. I was the reason the company stayed afloat when others sank. But none of that seemed to matter the day they walked in with fresh suits, smug grins, and the arrogance of people who had never built anything from scratch. That day, everything changed. The new CEO had been in office for exactly 27 days when he called me into the boardroom. I thought it was a performance review, maybe a leadership update, or possibly a strategy session. I even brought notes. But the moment I saw the HR rep in the corner and the legal counsel flipping through a folder, my gut tightened. He didn't even pretend to soften the blow. We've decided to move in a new direction. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. Just like that. No thank you. No gold watch. No final handshake. Just security waiting outside the door. I didn't fight back. I didn't argue or ask for an explanation. I stood up, gathered my things with a calm that surprised even me, and walked out. But what they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to investigate, was that I'd seen this coming a year ago. I'd heard the whispers about acquisition and change. So while they were busy counting projected savings, I had been buying. Quietly, legally, and with precision. Bit by bit, I acquired shares, silent partners, dormant investors, a few private equity moves. They all handed me pieces of the company, unaware I was building a throne beneath them. The night after I was fired, I didn't drown in whiskey or rage. I sat in my study, lit a cigar, and looked through the updated portfolio. My ownership had reached 52%. The moment I crossed that threshold, I became the largest shareholder, and with that came board voting rights. I made 3 phone calls that night. One to my attorney, one to the head of investor relations, and one to the chairman of the board. The special meeting was set for 10 a.m. the next morning. The same time my former office would still be empty, and my nameplate would still be warm. When I walked into the boardroom the next morning, I wasn't wearing the same tailored suit they'd seen me in yesterday. This one was sharper, darker, and more deliberate. My steps were slow and measured. The new CEO's face drained when he saw me, as if a ghost had entered the room. "This is a private board meeting," he said. I smiled, dropped the folder on the table, and took the seat at the head. "Actually," I said, "as of last quarter's filing, I'm now the majority shareholder. This is my meeting." There was silence, cold, suffocating silence, and I let it hang there for a moment. The chairman confirmed my position. The legal team verified the documents. The votes were tallied, motions passed, and within 30 minutes, the boardroom became a courtroom. I laid out the strategy one had planned during my final days: cost efficiencies, new partnerships, and a blueprint for sustainable growth. The CEO tried to defend his role, citing fresh leadership vision, but it was too late. The damage had been done. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You made a mistake firing me, but your bigger mistake was underestimating the person you fired." I didn't need to raise my voice. The message was louder than thunder. The board voted again, unanimously. The CEO was removed effective immediately. I appointed an interim operations manager, someone who'd worked under me for years and actually understood the business. The man who fired me walked out of the same door I had used 24 hours earlier, but this time, with cameras watching. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched, memorizing the moment. I wanted it carved into memory. Not because I needed vengeance, but because it reminded me what calm preparation could do. You don't always need to fight with fists when you can outthink the battlefield before the war even begins. By the end of the day, my name was trending on financial news sites. "Ousted COO returns as boss," the headline screamed. Investors rallied. Morale lifted. And behind closed doors, department heads who had silently feared change now celebrated a return to stable leadership. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't release a statement. I simply got back to work. There's something poetic about returning to your office, not just as a leader, but as the man who now owns the building. The nameplate on my desk had been removed, so I left it that way. Let them guess who's really in charge. It started with whispers, low murmurs in hallways, glances exchanged across conference tables, nervous laughter at coffee machines. The kind of atmosphere you don't need to hear to feel. I walked the same hallways I used to, but everything had changed. Now, people stood a little straighter when I passed. Eyes darted away quickly, unsure if making eye contact meant favor or risk. It was ironic. Just days ago, I was being escorted out like dead weight. Now, every word I spoke seemed to carry the weight of a verdict. And that, frankly, was just how I needed it to be. When you're handed back power so swiftly, you learn to listen differently. The surface-level compliments and sudden praise from those who once ignored your contributions? Useless. But the ones who kept quiet, the ones who hadn't laughed when I was fired, who had sent a discreet message or left a supportive note at my desk, those people became my radar. They weren't loyal for opportunity. They were decent even when it cost them nothing. I compiled a private list of names that week. Not for revenge, but for reconstruction. If I was going to rebuild the company, I needed truth, not flattery. One afternoon, I lingered outside the break room just long enough to hear my name dropped. I heard he planned this all along, one voice said. No way. That kind of takeover doesn't just happen. You think he's going to start firing people? Another whispered. It was strange to be spoken about like a legend, like I had orchestrated a hostile coup from the shadows. But the truth was simpler. I saw a storm coming. And unlike them, I brought an umbrella, built a shelter, and bought the land it was going to flood. That wasn't betrayal. It was strategy born from experience. I had my assistant schedule meetings with each department head under the pretense of a routine alignment session. But really, I was studying reactions. Who would squirm when asked about last quarter's decisions? Who tried to downplay their role in the previous regime's changes? Who conveniently forgot they'd cheered when I was removed? One by one, I read them like open books. Some tried to rewrite history, but I lived it already. I didn't need a new version. A few good people owned their silence, even admitted regret. Those were the ones I respected. The others? I made notes. Quiet ones. A week after my return, I held a company-wide meeting. The auditorium was packed, and every eye was glued to the stage. I didn't deliver a grand speech or use flowery language. I spoke plainly. Some of you welcomed my return. Some of you didn't. That's okay. But what matters now is the future. If you're here to build, you're welcome. If you're here to manipulate or wait for someone else to fail, you'll find the door before I show it to you. The room went still. I didn't wait for applause. I simply walked off. Let silence do the talking. That night, I stayed late. I walked through the office, past empty cubicles and darkened screens. I remembered late nights spent here years ago, building operations frameworks from scratch, fixing broken supply chains, organizing the chaos others left behind. Back then, I wasn't anyone's boss. I was just a guy trying to keep everything afloat. The only thing that had changed now was leverage. Experience had taught me that leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about being steady when others trembled. I stood by the window, staring at the skyline. Somewhere in that city, the man who fired me was watching too. The next morning, the HR head resigned. No warning. Just an email sent at 6:03 a.m. She had been a close ally of the former CEO, and her departure triggered a chain reaction. Within 3 days, 2 more directors handed in their letters. Both had championed the new direction that led to my termination. Their absence didn't shake me. If anything, it cleared the path. I quickly promoted talent from within. Individuals who'd quietly held the place together while credit was stolen above them. The energy began to shift. People stopped whispering. They started asking questions, sharing ideas, hoping to be heard. One surprising thing happened during this transition. An email from someone I never expected, the new CEO's former executive assistant. She offered to meet discreetly. I think you'll want to know what was said about you before the firing, she wrote. We met after hours, off-site. She brought her notes, emails, recordings. Turns out, the plan to remove me had been long in motion, and it wasn't just about cost-saving or restructuring. It was personal. They saw me as a threat. You've been the brain behind too much for too long, one email read. If we don't act, he'll always have influence. I left that meeting with proof in hand. Not just of betrayal, but of a long, calculated effort to erase my legacy. That changed everything. This wasn't just business anymore. They hadn't just underestimated me. They tried to erase me. And if there's one thing you never do to a builder, it's tear down his foundation thinking he won't notice. That night, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't just going to restore the company. I was going to raise it higher than it had ever been. And everyone who tried to bury me, I'd make sure they remembered who they couldn't destroy. They say corporate walls have ears, but what they never tell you is that floors have memories. Every step I took through that building after my return echoed a decade of sweat, silent victories, and buried betrayals. I knew where the bodies were metaphorically buried, who had cut corners, who had faked numbers, who smiled too easily during audits. But I didn't rush into vengeance. That wasn't my style. If you've been burned once, you don't strike back with fire. You smother with silence until the room begs for oxygen. And that's exactly what I started to do, methodically and quietly. The polished floors of the executive suite had once been a sanctuary for strategic minds. But under the new regime, they had become a playground for pretenders, people who wore success like a tailored jacket but couldn't handle the weight of real responsibility. One by one, I invited them to meetings. Not formal ones, no boardroom, no witnesses. Just casual conversations that started with "tell me about your vision" and ended with me exposing holes in their logic they couldn't patch. I wasn't there to be impressed. I was there to see if any of them deserved to stay. Most didn't. The first to go was the VP of Strategy, a man who once bragged that my methods were old world and too risk-averse. In our meeting, I slid his own quarterly numbers across the table. "You burned through half your budget and missed 3 out of 4 KPIs, I said. "Tell me, were you building something or playing roulette with the company's future?" He stammered, blamed market volatility, then tried to shift focus to team inefficiencies. I nodded, let him speak, then handed him his reassignment letter, effective immediately. "Strategy begins with owning your mistakes," I said. "You never learned that." He never returned. But I wasn't just cleaning house. I was laying a new foundation. In the process, I found talent buried deep within departments. Workers who had never been asked for their thoughts, yet had solutions waiting in drafts and forgotten drive folders. There was an intern who created a customer retention model that outperformed our existing one by 23%. A junior analyst who reverse-engineered our competitors' pricing logic and proposed changes that could increase margins. These were the people I began to pull closer. Not yes men, but quiet thinkers, the kind who built before they bragged. My mission was clear: elevate the overlooked. Still, not everyone welcomed the shift. Some thought I was running a purge. Others believed I was on a vendetta tour. They didn't understand. I wasn't erasing history. I was correcting it. One night, I received a message slipped under my office door. No name. Just a single line: "You're making too many enemies." I laughed softly when I read it. I had made enemies the day I succeeded without their permission. This was just the aftermath. But it told me something important. Someone inside was getting nervous. And that meant I was finally pressing on the right pressure points. The next department audit revealed inflated budgets, hidden consulting contracts, and vendor kickbacks from the prior regime. I didn't react publicly. I called the CFO into my office. "You've got 2 days to clean this up," I said. "Or I will." He looked pale. "I didn't approve most of these," he began. I cut him off. "You didn't stop them either." He left the office quiet and red-faced. 2 days later, half of those contracts were dissolved and several vendors blacklisted. That was the difference between leadership and title holders. One acts when the house is on fire. The other waits for the flames to reach their chair. Through it all, I kept a journal, not for public record, but for myself. Every night, I wrote down 3 things. One person who showed integrity, one system that needed dismantling, and one lesson I couldn't afford to forget. It grounded me. This wasn't just a professional comeback. It was a personal reckoning. I had been loyal, and that loyalty had been weaponized against me. So now, I was loyal to no one but the mission, reviving a company that once ran on merit and rebuilding it for those who still believed in the work, not the politics. Word of my internal shakeups reached external investors. Some were nervous, but most were impressed. "You're running it like a startup again," one investor told me during a private call. "That's why we backed you in the first place." I smiled. "The difference now," I replied, is I own the startup. There was a pause on the line, followed by laughter. That was the moment I realized something vital. Power isn't just about position. It's about credibility. And credibility can't be bought, gifted, or stolen. It has to be earned in the trenches. I had the scars to prove it. By the end of the third week, a new culture had begun to take root. Meetings were shorter. Results were sharper. People who once tiptoed now contributed with confidence. I saw fewer fake smiles and more focused eyes. I hadn't threatened anyone. I'd simply reminded them that leadership was watching and that standards had returned. This wasn't a kingdom ruled by fear. It was a workshop run by builders. And I had every intention of making it a blueprint for how power, when wielded right, could restore what politics had broken. I arrived an hour earlier than usual that Monday morning, not to impress anyone, but to be alone with the building before the day's noise set in. There's something about silence that tells the truth. Without the chatter of ambition or the buzz of phones, the air hums with memory. I walked the floor like a man returning to a half-finished home. This company used to be a place of passion, of bold ideas drawn on whiteboards and breakthroughs sparked by late-night coffee runs. But somewhere along the line, bureaucracy had drowned the builder's spirit. I had returned to resurrect it. A security guard, one of the few who'd quietly nodded at me even on the day I was fired, tipped his cap as I passed. "Feels good to have you back, sir," he said. I paused and smiled, not for him, but for what he represented. People like him were the invisible pillars of this place. They saw everything and said little. He'd seen the arrogance of the new regime, the panic behind the polished boardroom doors when I returned, and now the quiet rebuilding. I made a mental note to meet with all non-managerial staff personally. Not for politics, for perspective. By noon, I had finalized what I called the foundation files, a set of directives designed not for the boardroom, but for the builders, engineers, project managers, logistics teams, coordinators. I sent the files through internal channels with a note. "You're the engine. This is your blueprint. Build freely. Build boldly. Leadership is listening again." What followed stunned me. My inbox flooded, not with approval-seeking or vague thank yous, but with raw, unfiltered ideas. The kind that don't show up on PowerPoint slides. Suggestions for streamlining production. New supplier alternatives. Even proposals for internal mentorship programs. The kind of things that only builders would care enough to offer. But not everyone was celebrating. The higher up the ladder, the more uncomfortable things became. Middle managers who had thrived in the chaos of the previous leadership realized their games wouldn't work anymore. One such figure, a senior sales director known for sweet-talking numbers, tried cornering me in the hallway. "There's been a lot of change. People are feeling unsettled," he said with that practiced corporate concern. I looked him dead in the eye and replied, "Maybe they're unsettled because they were too comfortable doing nothing." He didn't speak again. I didn't need him to. His kind had had their moment. It was over. I hosted a town hall that Friday. No stage, no suits, just a chair, a mic, and me standing at ground level with the rest of them. This company lost its soul, I told them, and that's on all of us. But the soul of a company isn't found in its strategy decks. It's found in the people who come in early, stay late, ask hard questions, and take smart risks. From today, you don't need permission to lead from wherever you stand. The applause wasn't thunderous, it was honest. And for the first time in years, I believed the builders were back. One of the younger engineers approached me afterward. She looked nervous, but determined. "Sir, my team came up with a way to reduce downtime on our main product line by 19%, but we were told not to present it because it would disrupt the flow of existing priorities." I asked for her file. She handed it over with trembling hands. I read it over the weekend. She was right. On Monday, I had her present the model to the board. By Friday, it was in motion, and her manager, the one who'd silenced her, was reassigned to compliance tracking. I wasn't punishing him. I was reminding everyone what mattered now. The atmosphere began to shift tangibly. You could feel it in the air. The builders were rising. Not because I commanded it, but because they finally had space to. No more 5-layer approval chains. No more punishing innovation for the sake of preserving mediocrity. Every project now had a mandatory ground feedback loop, a system where the people doing the work had final input before anything was marked complete. Some executives scoffed at the idea. "It's going to slow us down," one said. I responded plainly, "If speed costs us our soul, I'd rather be late and legendary than fast and forgotten." I also made a point to walk the floors without warning. No entourage, no announcements, just me and a notepad. I wanted people to see me not as the shadowy owner who came back, but as the builder I had always been. In the packaging room, someone had scribbled on a whiteboard, "Leadership isn't about climbing ladders. It's about holding them steady for others." I took a photo of that board and made it the background on my office display. That sentence summed up everything I'd come back to do. I hadn't just reclaimed a company. I had reclaimed a purpose. The final moment of that chapter came quietly. I was alone in my office late one evening, reviewing reports when I received a text from an old colleague who had left when I was fired. "Just heard what you've done. You didn't just return, you rebuilt. Proud of you." I stared at that message for a long time. It wasn't the praise that got me. It was the validation of the mission, that in a world where politics had replaced principles and short-term wins had buried long-term vision, someone still believed in building. And if even one person believed, it meant I wasn't done yet. By the start of the fourth week, the board had begun asking for clarity meetings. Not out of genuine curiosity, but because power was shifting under their feet, and they could feel the tremors. Most of them had been passive during my firing, too busy calculating their bonuses to question the decision. But now that the company's numbers were stabilizing and even improving, they wanted to rewrite history and align themselves with what they thought was a winning comeback. What they didn't know was that I wasn't done rewriting the company. And this time, the boardroom was next on my list. I scheduled the meeting in the largest conference hall on the 30th floor, not the usual tight, closed-door setting. I wanted space. I wanted presence. More importantly, I wanted the department heads to see what accountability looked like at the highest level. The board had grown complacent over the years, meeting quarterly to nod at presentations and sip complimentary wine while real work happened below them. That era was ending. They'd rubber-stamped a decision to fire me without a single one of them reading the performance reports I'd submitted. That silence cost the company millions, and I was going to make them feel it. The meeting opened like any other. Handshakes, muted greetings, false smiles. I let them settle. Then I dimmed the lights and projected a single slide. Silence is not strategy. They shifted in their chairs. I walked to the front, unarmed, without a script. "You voted to remove me based on a proposal that was never validated. You didn't ask for a rebuttal. You didn't verify the numbers. And you signed off on leadership that nearly derailed this company in under a month." No one interrupted. I could see some of them looking at the exits. There was none. Just this room, and their reflection in it. Then I laid out the timeline, emails, memos, ignored warnings. I didn't need to embellish anything. The facts were enough. Revenue losses, internal friction, client attrition, and then a shift, an internal timeline showing how things turned after my return. I ended with a chart of projected growth based on the new systems now in place. The room was silent. But I wasn't done. "I'm not here to humiliate you," I said. "I'm here to hold you to the standard you failed to hold yourselves to. From today, this board doesn't observe. It contributes. And those who don't will be replaced." One board member, a man who once praised the former CEO as a visionary disruptor, cleared his throat. "Is this a restructuring of the board itself?" he asked. His tone tried to carry authority. I simply nodded. "Exactly that. But not for punishment. For accountability. We will now have quarterly peer reviews for the board, just as employees do. Your seats will be evaluated not by tenure, but by impact." You could hear the oxygen leave the room. This wasn't a power grab. It was a realignment. They were being dragged out of the ivory tower and dropped into the very trenches they'd ignored. After the meeting, 2 board members voluntarily resigned. They cited personal reasons. I didn't press. Letting them walk out on their own was cleaner. I already had recommendations for replacements. Individuals who had built companies from scratch, who understood scale, risk, and resilience. Not legacy seat holders, but legacy makers. I wasn't trying to preserve tradition. I was trying to build a new one. One where leadership didn't just sit in boardrooms. It walked floors, answered calls, and asked better questions. A company's soul isn't preserved by the elite. It's protected by those who've earned their place and continue to earn it every day. Within days, the internal culture shifted again. Word of the boardroom reckoning spread like wildfire. Employees didn't just feel protected, they felt powerful. They knew now that incompetence wouldn't be shielded just because it wore a title. And that changed everything. Engagement scores jumped. Performance proposals tripled. Even small things, like how meetings were conducted or how conflicts were resolved, began to evolve. People were no longer working to survive. They were working to build something they believed would finally last. I sat in my office late that Friday, reading the newly submitted company mission revisions sent by a volunteer team of employees. They didn't want to change the company's logo. They wanted to change its legacy. One line in the draft struck me deeply. "We are not built to endure. We are built to evolve, together." That single sentence felt like everything I had been trying to do from the moment I walked back through those doors. I printed it and framed it, not for show, but for memory. A reminder that sometimes the hardest structures to rebuild are the ones no one sees. That night, as I left the office, I didn't take the elevator. I walked down every floor, one by one. I peeked into empty workspaces, touched old conference tables, past vending machines I once used when money was tight and the nights were long. It was a strange kind of peace, a silence not born from defeat, but from resolution. The reckoning was done. The rebuilding had begun. And the real story of this company? It wasn't that I was fired and returned. It was that I came back, not for revenge, but to remind everyone what building looked like. I always believed that companies, like people, should have a soul, something deeper than numbers, louder than market trends, more enduring than stock performance. But somewhere along the way, our company lost that. It became a place where buzzwords mattered more than values, and status took the place of substance. That's what I'd returned to fix. But as the dust settled and the final pieces of power shifted into place, I realized something unsettling. Rebuilding the company was never the hardest part. The hardest part was walking away from what I'd built, knowing it could crumble again if I didn't protect it. That's when I sat down and wrote what I called the legacy clause. It wasn't a legal document. It was a principle baked into our culture, passed as part of the new governance structure. It stated that no executive, no matter how high, could serve more than 6 years without direct reevaluation by the people they led. And that succession planning had to begin the moment they were appointed, not the year they planned to leave. It shook the remaining executives. But to me, it was the only way to ensure no one else would ever be blindsided, discarded, or betrayed like I had been. I called a final all-hands meeting, not in a hall or on a video call, but in the atrium, where the walls echoed and the light fell naturally across the marble floor. I stood on the ground level again, with no podium. "This isn't a goodbye," I began, "but it is a release." People looked around, unsure what I meant. I explained that the company didn't belong to me anymore, not in spirit. It belonged to the people who showed up every day with ideas, frustrations, and dreams. "I will still be here," I said, "but not as your boss. From today, I step back." A stunned silence followed. Then a quiet clap. Then more. And finally, a wave of applause that had nothing to do with titles or power, but everything to do with the fact that, for once, someone had left not in disgrace, not in defeat, but by choice. By completion. I hadn't just fixed the company. I had finished what I started a decade ago, building something that could live without me. That was legacy. In the weeks that followed, I began mentoring younger founders in other cities, people who had vision but no support, drive but no network. I told them the truth, that leadership isn't earned by job titles or office size. It's earned in quiet choices, in integrity held when no one's watching, in walking out with your head high when you could have burned the whole place down. And each time I told them that, I saw something familiar in their eyes, hunger, but not for power, for purpose. That's how I knew I had done something right. One morning, months later, I received a package at home. Inside was a photo of the company's new headquarters, freshly built on the same street where our original building once stood. On the back was a note written in bold, familiar handwriting, "For the builder who taught us how to rebuild. We kept the floors polished, but now they remember you." I stood there, holding that photo, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile, not the careful one I wore in boardrooms or the polite one for press interviews. A real one. Because the truth is, revenge might feel satisfying, but rebuilding something stronger? That's power no one can take from you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or replaced. Remind them that quiet power still wins, and that true builders always return, not for applause, but to leave behind something that outlasts them.